As you may have heard by now, I'm launching my own supplement line called Adapt Naturals in just a few weeks. We're starting with a daily stack of 5 supplements called the Core Plus Bundle, which are designed to add back in what the modern world has crowded out and help you feel and perform your best. But no matter how good our supplements are, and they are really good, the truth is that you can't supplement yourself out of a bad diet or lifestyle. That's why we'll be launching the Adapt Naturals Core Reset app right alongside the Core Plus supplement bundle. This app will guide you through a 28-day kickstart program to dial in your nutrition, sleep, movement, and stress management. The Core Reset app features meal plans, recipes, shopping lists, guided movement and stress management exercises, tools, resources, and so much more. And we're so serious about helping you to optimize your diet and lifestyle that we're literally giving the app away for free to all Adapt Naturals customers. When used together, the Core Reset app and Core Plus supplement bundle will give you a powerful, yet simple and affordable way to take charge of your health and start living the life you want to live. Watch out for more information about Adapt Naturals in the next few weeks. Hey everybody, Chris Kresser here. Welcome to another episode of Revolution Health Radio. Back pain is one of the most common medical complaints today, and it seems to be on the rise. According to Statista, almost 40% of the US population experienced lower back problems in the last 3 months in 2019, compared to just 28% in 1997. And if you're 65 years and older, that goes up to 46% of adults experiencing lower back pain in the last 3 months. 54% of the people who have lower back pain have had it for 5 years or longer, and almost 75% take non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen to manage the pain. Now, this is a huge problem because a growing body of research has linked the use of NSAIDs like ibuprofen over a long period of time to everything from rebound pain to ulcers to GI disorders to kidney damage. So we clearly need a new approach to both understanding and addressing back pain, and that's what we're going to cover in today's episode. I'm excited to welcome Dr. Stefanie Cohen as my guest. In addition to being a doctor of physical therapy, she holds 25 world records in powerlifting and was the first woman in the history of the sport to deadlift 4.4 times her body weight. I can't even imagine deadlifting almost 4.5 times my body weight. She recently took a break from powerlifting and transitioned to professional boxing, where she has a record of 2 wins, 0 losses, and 1 draw. But Stefi didn't have an easy road to success. At one point, she suffered from such severe lower back pain that she couldn't tie her shoes without difficulty. Unfortunately, through the approaches that we'll discuss in this episode and that she outlined in her recent book, Back in Motion, she was able to fully recover and go on to break multiple world records in powerlifting, arguably one of the most demanding sports on your lower back. Dr. Cohen's an inspiring athlete and a wealth of knowledge in this area, and her method of addressing back pain has empowered thousands of people to achieve a pain-free state and reach higher levels of performance in their sport. I learned a lot myself in this conversation, and I think you will too. Let's dive in. Stefi, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'd love to learn a little bit more about your story. You've had an incredible career with 25 world records in powerlifting, and you were the first woman to deadlift almost 4.5 times your body weight, which I cannot even imagine doing. And now you switched over to boxing and are enjoying a good record there. I think 2 wins and 0 losses, 1 draw. But I know it hasn't always been easy. You had a period of time where you had pretty intense back pain and couldn't really even tie your shoes without experiencing pain. So, yeah, I'd love to just hear about what your journey has been. You know, how did you get started? What was that initial injury, and how did that impact you, and what did you do to get through that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my athletic career when I was 8 years old, playing soccer back home in Venezuela, where I was born and raised. Um, I sucked at the beginning. I was really bad, but I was just doing it honestly out of the love for the sport. And one thing that we have as kids that we lose as we get older is patience and understanding of just how long, or actually it's naiveness of how long it takes to actually get good at something, because you're doing it just to play with your friends, to be outdoors, to enjoy the sunshine, maybe to make your dad proud or your mom, things like that. But you're not outcome oriented. You're so much more in the moment, so much more process oriented. And that's something that we definitely lose over time. And I'll touch back. There's a reason why I'm mentioning this, so I'll get back to that. So I finished my soccer career when I was about 18, 19. I actually ended up moving to the States with a potential soccer scholarship that I ended up turning down because, I mean, moving from South America to the States wasn't something easy to do by yourself. There's a lot of just differences in the way things work that you have to try to figure out on your own and get accustomed to the culture, the education system, the way that the way that the institutions run testings. Like, for example, scantrons weren't a thing in
Right.
South America. So even small things like that can really throw you off and make you have to adjust and get accustomed to as well. Simple things like doing your own laundry or understanding what you have to eat, how much you have to eat, what kind of foods you have to eat. Obviously, like socially, humor is much more different, South America to the States. So that's also another adjustment that you have to make. So I kind of got to a point where I had to make a decision between really taking my school, my education seriously, and really trying hard to get good grades and figuring out my place now in a new society, or keep playing soccer. So that was kind of a fork in the road, a difficult decision that I had to make, and ended up leaning more into education. Come from a Jewish Hispanic family that heavily values traditional education, formal education, and that just kind of was part of my values growing up. Placing a lot of importance on school and making sure that you have a plan B and that you have something to fall into if things don't go as planned. And we all know how kind of delicate and volatile people's athletic careers can be. It can all be gone in the blink of an eye. Just one injury, one bad lift, one bad punch, and it's all over. So I really wanted to make sure that I had a solid educational foundation. So I decided to move back to Miami because it was much closer to home. It's just a 2 hour and a half flight from Miami to Venezuela, and it's just much more central. And the culture was something that was much more accustomed to as well. It was just more comfortable for the time period of my life that now, looking back, I wish I would have just, toughened it up and stayed there and try to figure out how to make it happen for myself, stay playing soccer and try to figure out multiple things at a time. But, everything's easier or better in hindsight.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So when I gave up, and I say gave up because I really did. When I gave up my dream of playing soccer, after several months, I just kind of felt like there was such a massive void in my heart, really. And I realized that I wasn't ready to give up that part of my identity, which was being an athlete. I still felt like I had much more to give. And even if it wasn't through soccer, I just wanted to look for another physical or sports outlet to dedicate some time to, and trying to climb my way to the top in a different sport. So that started what I consider a discovery period of trying different things out to see kind of not only what sticks, but what most aligns with my skills, my talent, and my passion at the time. Like, I didn't want to just do a sport because I liked it. I wanted to pick a sport that I had kind of an innate aptitude for, that I could objectively and rationally get better at over time. So that's kind of how I landed into CrossFit. That was my first taste for lifting weights. And I really wanted to go to the CrossFit Games. That was around the time 2010, 2011, where the CrossFit Games were just getting started and everybody wanted to be a Games athlete. Everybody thought that just doing your regular WOD CrossFit class once a day, you could make it to the Games kind of thing. And in that pursuit, I wanted to focus on Olympic weightlifting because it was my weakest link. Strength was my biggest weakness. So I started devoting more time to Olympic weightlifting, found myself an amazing coach. His name was Camilo Garcia, who coached for the national Cuban team. And he kind of took me under his wing and really, really wanted to make me an Olympic champion. Like that was his promise to me. So I did that for about 6 years. And again, I found myself in a much similar situation to undergrad, where I knew that the next logical step professionally for me was to go to graduate school, just in order to be taken seriously in an industry that's so male dominated, that I knew I was gonna have to work hard to gain the respect of the fitness industry in general, especially because of one, how polluted it is, and two, how male dominated it was. So I understood that the logical step for me was to get a degree that kind of gave me a little bit more power of authority to speak on the topics I wanted to be speaking about, and to obviously coach and do the things that I wanted to do. So I got into grad school to get my doctorate in physical therapy. And again, at the beginning, I was trying really hard to do both. I had in the back of my mind, I had that story of, when I quit playing soccer because I couldn't do both things, and I just refused to let that happen to me again. So I was trying to do literally the impossible. Just this time was even harder because grad school is not a joke. Grad school is a full-time job, no matter how you see it. So I was the first 6 months of grad school, I traveled with my barbell everywhere that I went so that I could, any time that I had during the day to squeeze in my workout, I would do it. Like I would even pull into an LA Fitness, or just pull into the university gym just with my barbell, and I would do my workout at whatever time I had, even if it meant like skipping half an hour of a class, or skipping half an hour of the 11:30 class to 12, and then half an hour from the next one after lunch. I would just try to figure it out like that. And while at the same time, obviously, making sure that I'm passing my classes. I never failed a full class in my entire life. Like I was never an A+ student, but I'd never failed a class. So in my mind, that wasn't even a possibility of something that could happen to me. So it was December, and I went for my winter break, Christmas, everything, and I come back home, and there's a pile of letters like this underneath my door, and I'm like, oh my god, what's this? Committee of Academic Review. Apparently, I had failed a class with a 74. In any class at any given point in time, if you get any less than a 75, you get kicked out of the program, and then you have to write an appeal and explain why you got a 74, and then maybe get granted a second chance, kind of thing. But because I had missed all the letters that they were sending me, they just effective immediately removed me from the program because I wasn't responding to their letters. They probably just assumed I didn't want to be part of it anymore. Anyway, so get kicked out of grad school, have to sit in the academic committee of academic review, explain my situation, and pretty much convince them to give me a second chance. And I got it, and I remember sitting down at this like round table, and the professor on my left was like, Steph, I just don't think that you're as strong as a student as you think you are. I think you need to just pick one thing and focus on that. But I don't think that you have the capability of doing both. And I think you're going to require extensive psychological counseling to really let go of that part of your identity, of the sports part. Like you got to give that up. It's too it's long gone. You're 26, you're 25, 26. Like you better give that up and focus on what really matters. And it was that really kind of lit a fire under my ass. I'm like, no, like now, just because you said that, I won't do that. Like I have to prove it just to myself that I can do both. Like I can't be in the same situation twice and again make the same decision, and probably 10 years down the line again regret that I didn't really, really give it my all. So that's kind of how I land into powerlifting. I say, all right, like the mistake I made before was that I quit entirely, instead of maybe doing 20% less of the sport and dedicating that 20% to my school. So this time I'm going to do something similar. I'm going to keep lifting. I'm just going to do Olympic lifting twice a week instead of 12 sessions. I was doing double sessions like a crazy person. 2 or 3 sessions of weightlifting a week, And the rest of the time, I'm still going to go to the gym for much less time, and I'm just going to get stronger, because if I get stronger, then if I get stronger in three basic movements, the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, logically, my snatch and my clean and jerk will eventually go up. Like, they can't go down from there if
Right.
if my absolute level of strength is going up. And picked up a barbell for the first time, did my first sumo deadlift, getting into more powerlifting type training, and I pulled like 315, which was so rare at that time in powerlifting for women. You didn't see that often, and if you did, it was the much bigger weight classes. So I realized that there was, again, back to my discovery period when I was 20. What are my skills, my talents, my passions? Does this align with the aptitudes that I was God given? And are there any other skills that I could get better at to climb my way to the top in this one sport? And it just seemed so obvious that I had something special that other people just didn't have, just because of how exponential my growth was in the sport, just how fast I was able to progress, and how seemingly easy it was for me to pick up on new skills, new movements, and how well I was adapting to that style of training. And that's kind of how I landed into powerlifting.
Hmm.
And then 5 years, fast forward into powerlifting, I guess 2 to 3 years, like, I progressed so fast, and my mindset was such that I was just so worried about getting strong fast. Getting strong fast. How fast can I climb to the top? How fast can I get strong? That I forgot that I was still human, and that there's an adaptation period, that you're essentially fighting your biology at that point by just putting so much pressure on yourself, and such a massive amount of tonnage through your bones, your tendons, your ligaments, your muscles, your entire system. You feel like you're invincible, you're young. I didn't have any injuries. I hadn't accumulated any injuries in the past. So I just thought that I could just demand more and more and more and more from my body. And that ended up in because I was developing my business in parallel with high performance method, I felt such an immense pressure to continuously compete. And because I had so much pressure to continuously compete, I also felt like there was a certain level of expectation from the public every time that I would step onto the platform, to continue breaking not only my own records, but world records, things that people have never seen a woman do before. So I was ignoring all the signs and symptoms and signals that my body was sending me about the state of my body, specifically with my back, and just started taking more and more ibuprofen, just ignoring it. Started having like just awful anxiety, panic attacks, just from school, taking Adderall, caffeine, and the stress of everything. I was traveling every other weekend, and it was just the perfect environment for an absolute disaster, both mind and body. And I really did hit rock bottom, but I was so freaking stubborn. Even like, I just refused to quit anything because of my past experiences, that I just kind of kept going. And I ended up graduating in spite of my declining mental health and my awful panic attacks and anxiety and debilitating back pain. Ended up graduating and continuously competing and continuously breaking world records, but at a massive expense for my physical and mental health. So yeah, graduated grad school. A couple of years went by. I was just focusing on my business, competing a little bit less, trying to recover from those super stressful, awful 3 years. And then the pandemic hit. And it was the first time in like 6 years that I felt justified in taking time off, which is insane, because I could, like you said, I could barely tie my shoes. How is it that the only moment where I feel justified to take a step back from my training and not compete is when the entire world shuts down? That's crazy to me, but it was so eye-opening at that time, that it was kind of I burst my own bubble of reality where I was like, man, none of this matters if I don't have my health. It's not about how fast I can get strong. It's about how long can I stay injury free and healthy. It's not about what people think about me. It's about what I think of myself. I don't have to do this for anybody other than me, and I can't do anything if my body doesn't work.
Mhm.
So that was kind of a reality check of me to me, and I gave myself permission to not train for a powerlifting meet. There weren't any powerlifting meets because the entire world stopped, but even then, like, I just felt I was always scared of people coming to take it. So silly, not looking talking about it, but I was always scared of people coming and taking my records, or of like my name being erased from the wall and like from the history of powerlifting. Like, I always felt like there was another girl working harder than me, wanting to take everything that I had worked so hard for. And yeah, it got to a point where my body was just so wrecked that it was just the right time. Everything kind of, all the pieces kind of fell together, and it made sense for me to take a break from lifting. And naturally, me being the person that I am, an athlete and such a goal centered person, I had to find another outlet to just test myself, right, in another way. So because I had ignored my cardiovascular conditioning for so many years, like I'm talking about, listen, when I was at my peak powerlifting shape, best shape ever powerlifting strength wise, I was in my worst human shape possible. Like, I would go up a flight of stairs and be out of breath, not even joking. I couldn't jump high, not even high, like jump a little bit. No, I couldn't. Like, my body just felt like it was made of aluminum. Like, there was no motion, no movement. It was just really good up and down motion, very
Right.
slow. Nothing fast, nothing to the side, nothing bendy. Like, my body was just this rigid concrete thing that just was really good at down and up.
Lifting heavy weights.
Yeah, and that was it.
Mhm.
So I was like, man, I really should do something for my heart. Started getting into like podcasts about breath, and started looking into Brian McKenzie and Andy Galpin, and just realizing again just how bad I treated my body for so many years, and maybe also all the contributions that might have had in my biology and my physiology, and the contributions that I probably had for my panic attacks. There's actual science that points at having poor cardiovascular health and an increase in concentration in CO2, and a decreased ability to clear that CO2 from your blood, that heavily contributes to anxiety panic attacks. So all of that was kind of my motivation to move into a more cardio based sport. So I decided to just put a heavy bag on my squat rack in my garage at home during the pandemic, during the lockdown. And I had a pair of pink gloves that a friend of mine gave me. And I just started hitting it just for cardio, doing like 3-minute rounds. I knew that's as much as I knew about boxing at the time, that they did 3-minute rounds. And I probably had to look it up. I had no idea. I just knew that UFC was 5 and that boxing was less. And that's kind of how I got started into boxing. And I remember, like, when I first started, I had my coach Kareem, who was coaching me on this street, literally like on the street right here in front of my house. I had to keep telling him, I'm like, Kareem, listen, I get intense really fast, and I don't want this to happen to me with boxing, because I'm going back to powerlifting. This is just something I'm doing in the interim. I don't want to get too intense about it. I just want to have fun doing it. And it's just me, impossible, right? So every time it was like I would get a workout in and it wouldn't go as planned, so I would want to repeat the workout the next day or even like in the afternoon. And slowly I just became super obsessed with boxing, and turned pro 6 months later, and I have 3 fights under my belt, and now I train full-time boxing.
Are, are you thinking you are going to go back to powerlifting, or are you not sure? You're just going to see how boxing goes?
So I don't think, I don't know, I mean, part of me feels, even if I didn't go back to powerlifting with the intent of breaking more world records or being the best or beating people at competitions, I feel, so much of what I have is thanks to the powerlifting community, that I never want to fully let that go, and I want to always try to give back. And yeah, if my body allows me to participate in a meet in a, an amateur way, like not trying to break records. Then that's if my personality allows me to do that. But in some way, shape, or form, I always want to be involved within that. The one thing in powerlifting that I definitely want to try to do is try to get a 600-pound deadlift. I think that just having that one goal in parallel with boxing, that's something I can do. But obviously, I can't train full-time powerlifting and full-time boxing.
Sure.
But
Sure.
I think I can incorporate some deadlifting into my routine once every week or once every 2 weeks for a period of time and try to get that 600 pound.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we'll be cheering for you. I've been a huge fan of Thrive Market since they launched 8 years ago. I love having my favorite healthy products shipped right to my door at a fraction of the price I'd pay elsewhere. I use Thrive to order not only pantry staples like coconut milk, dark chocolate, and collagen peptides, but also toxin free personal and household products. Thrive makes it really easy to find what you're looking for, whether that's paleo, low carb or keto, or gluten free. You can filter by more than 90 values and lifestyles to find what works for you. I also love Thrive's values as a company. They offer carbon neutral shipping, and when you become a Thrive member, you sponsor a family in need. Join Thrive Market today and get $80 in free groceries. That's THRIVE market.com/revolution health, all one word, to get $80 in free groceries. That's thrivemarket.com/revolution health. You probably know that the human body is mostly water. What you probably don't know is that everything else in your body is 50% amino acids. These building blocks of life are essential for health and fitness. No matter how you like to move, whatever you do to stay fit, amino acids are essential. This is why Kion Aminos is my fundamental supplement for fitness. I drink them every day for energy, to build muscle, and to recover faster. Kion Aminos is backed by over 20 years of clinical research, has the highest quality ingredients, no fillers or junk, undergoes rigorous quality testing, and tastes amazing with all natural flavors. So if you want more energy, lean muscle, and faster recovery, you need to get Kion Aminos. You can now save 20% on subscriptions and 10% on one-time purchases. Just go to getkion.com/Kresser. That's GETKION.com/Kresser. So when you look back, I mean, that's quite a story. I really loved hearing it, and there's a lot there. I think that a lot of people can relate to, not necessarily being the best in the world at something, but just the, facing all of the different challenges and the way that you approached those and overcame those. And also, I think a lot of listeners in the podcast, and I have my own version of this story, have had a situation where we were essentially forced into taking care of ourselves for some reason or another. In your case, it was the pandemic that shut down the competitions and really kind of gave you permission in a way to back off that you weren't able to give yourself before that happened. For me, it was a chronic illness that made it impossible for me to keep going at the frequency that I was going at before. So when you think back on that, like how has that changed you? What looks different in your life now, in your training, in how you relate to yourself? What did you take away from that experience?
Yeah, I think obviously, and I alluded to that already about just changing the perspective of changing your perspective, your mindset from how fast can I accomplish a certain task to making sure that you're taking care of yourself in the process, and you're prioritizing your recovery, and you're prioritizing adapting to your workouts, and you're prioritizing your mental health and your heart and your bloods and just everything that plays a role in that pursuit of the peak level of shape that you're aspiring to have. Obviously none of that can happen if those fundamental pyramids or fundamental health markers are not there, right? So again, when we're young, we don't really pay attention to those things. We think nothing's ever going to happen to us until something does, in the form of an injury or an illness or mental health, whatever it is. And that's when you kind of realize. But it's funny because I don't think that anybody listening to this will actually get it until something like that happens to them. It really, so it's everybody learns in one way or another, sooner or later. Another way in which that whole experience changed me is in the reasoning behind, like, my why of pursuing certain things. Like, why am I wanting to be the best powerlifter in the world? Why am I wanting to you know be a professional boxer? Why do I want my business to grow to six figures plus? What's the reason behind all of that? And before, it used to be mainly external, mainly driven by it's just external validation, essentially. I don't know if it's because of the way that I was brought up, or just constantly having to prove myself to peers and family members and teachers and whatnot, because I was always kind of, the black sheep that people never thought was going to be anything. And now, I'm not saying that I've accomplished everything that I wanted to accomplish by any means. Like, I still consider myself pretty ambitious, and I'm by no means content with where I am in life. But I think that when you start doing things for yourself, again, it's just a shift in perspective, right? Like, it doesn't change your the intensity at which you tackle certain things. It doesn't change how hard you work, or how long you dedicate to something. It doesn't change anything. It's just that slight shift in perspective of, like, why am I doing this? Am I doing it for myself? And when doing it for yourself is the answer, it just leads to so much more happiness and enjoyment of the process. Again, tying it back to when you're younger, right? Like, when you're young, you just do things for yourself because you like it. And it doesn't matter if it's going to take you 5 years to even, like, be stop being benched, and just be in it, play the first, how do you say it in English, like the first period.
Right. First
Yeah,
half, first in
first
soccer.
half, first half,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter to you because you're doing exactly what you want to be doing. You're doing it out of enjoyment, out of just for yourself. It took me, when I started playing soccer, like I said, I sucked, and it took 3, 4, 5 years for me to even just stop being benched and play 15 minutes of the game,
Hmm.
legit. And I remember really losing that when I grew up after soccer, especially getting into CrossFit, just feeling like I was running out of time. Even being 19 and 20 years old, I felt like I was too old,
Right.
because there's this, like, arbitrary timeline at which everything is supposed to happen. Right in my head, I only had 9 more years, because when you're 30, you're old. So I had this again, this pressure that was really manufactured by society, that created this
Hmm.
beliefs in my head of when things needed to happen for me, that made me not be patient, that made me not enjoy the moment, and made me not be process oriented and just want the results right then and there, that led me to be extremely injured, and ultimately ending my career prematurely in powerlifting.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about that specifically, back pain injuries. So you've written a book, Back in Motion, and you've had your own personal experience with back pain. I imagine you've worked a lot with people with back pain as a physical therapist, and your book outlines a really different approach to how to even think about back pain from the start and then what to do about it. So tell us a little bit about, some of the biggest myths about back pain. Let's start there. And then we can talk about how the science of understanding pain has evolved over the recent couple decades, because there has been some huge changes that I don't think have really percolated down to mainstream awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Back in Motion is a book that I started writing right at the beginning of my own experience with back pain. I was, I think, starting my second year of grad school, and I had access to all of these awesome professors that seemingly knew a lot about the topic, right? And I was so disappointed because the answers were so inconsistent between one another. It was like, even like in the diagnoses that I would get from one professor to the other was heavily different. Their rationale for why it happened was different, and their plan of care was different as well. And to me, it was it was so confusing because when you're in when you're getting a degree that is required in order to get a license, you are forced to think inside the box, right? Because essentially they're covering their own ass, where they're teaching you this very like methodical thought process way of doing an examination. You take history, evaluation, exam, and you have all of these like special tests that they call that you either circle yes or no. And it's all of these like boxes, step by step process that essentially prevents you from thinking on your own and thinking based on first principles, right? Like you're forced to think by analogy. You're forced to think based on what they think is the way to think, not what you're actually observing and what is actually in front of you. So that became very obvious to me quick, in that kind of just pursuit for an answer for what was going on with my back. And that's kind of what made me interested in the topic and what made me want to start doing research and writing things down. It was never at the beginning, it was never my intention to write a book. It was just literally I'm gonna start a file that has all of the current best practices about back pain and all the best research, and I'm going to pay attention to neuroscience, neuroscientists and pain specialists that talk about this, and I'm just going to try to put everything together for my own understanding. And as I gathered a little bit more clarity on this subject, I wanted to find a way to get this information to other people because I found it so helpful in a period of so much uncertainty. Because experiencing back pain is a little, I don't know if have you ever had an experience with back pain?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. It's so much different than any other injury that you have because it's like one, the way that most therapists and doctors explain it to you makes it seem like it's so much more of a bigger deal than it actually is. So in your head, you're already making it seem like it's this like lifelong life sentence that you're going to have, that your discs are just perpetually degenerating and that your jelly donut is leaking outside everywhere in your nerves and the
That's right.
pain traveling down your leg, it's going to get to your toes and then you're not going to, it's just
Yeah, and
so
eventually you'll get eventually you have to have surgery, and the surgery doesn't there's like a 50-50 chance that you might get worse or get better with the surgery, and yeah,
yeah.
it's a pretty bleak thing
And
that they picture they paint.
the thought of a back surgery, I don't know why it's so much worse than a knee surgery or shoulder surgery. It's like if you have a back surgery, like you have a big problem there.
Yeah.
And those beliefs influence our perception of pain as well. So I was like, man, I need to find a way to put all of this together in a way that's easy to digest for most people, and then come up with a very general plan of care for most people to be able to follow alongside them improving their understanding of what back pain actually is. So that was the inception of the book. The book does start with the most common back pain myths, and I think I'm not gonna be able to like. I think there's like 10 of them that we write about, but I'll just cover the main
Pick a
one.
couple of your favorites.
Yeah. The first one is that you need an MRI in order to determine what the cause of your back pain is. Surprisingly, MRIs for the purpose of identifying someone's cause of back pain are only 56% sensitive. So that means most of the time they're giving you either confounding findings or false positives, right? So we know already that the answers that you get from an MRI are not correlated at all really with your pain experience. The example that I can give you is, listen, I spent 3 years with just awful back pain, and I just refused to get an MRI because that was one of the first papers that I ever read, and I'm like, man, I don't need the MRI because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the MRI says. I still have to be doing the same thing that I'm doing. But eventually I was like, you know what, I'm curious, I'm going to do it for science. Like, I want to see what the MRI says. Subconsciously, I was like, I really hope something comes up in the MRI. Like, I really fucking
Smoking
hope.
gun.
Yeah, I really just hope that there's something so obvious there that I could, fuse together, that I could get a surgery or I could get an injection or something that would give me much, much more clarity into this whole thing. Go get my MRI, come out, squeaky clean, nothing. Meanwhile, I can't bend. I'm like,
Yeah.
how does this make any sense?
I've
But
seen
again,
those studies too, and I've talked about them. The one at UCLA where they took people with back pain, gave them MRIs. Just as many people who had pain had you know no issues, and just many people who had no pain had slip discs or other structural problems that you would expect would cause pain. And
yeah,
I've been treating patients for 15 years. I've had so many conversations with them about this, where they come into the clinic and they say, oh, I got to get this surgery because I had an MRI and I had a disc issue or this issue. And it takes a lot of talking people out of that, that this is not necessarily even the cause of your pain. Correlation is not causation, right? That's a fundamental principle in science. But I think it's really hard for us to get over that.
yeah.
If someone has pain and then they have an MRI and they see a structural issue, they just assume. And when I say they, I'm talking about the doctor too, but the doctor and the patient assume that those two things are related. And what you're saying and what the science says is they're not often related.
Also, isn't it crazy how it immediately becomes part of people's identity?
Yeah.
It's like the second that they're diagnosed with a herniated disc, a disc herniation or something more concrete on their back, it's forever a thing. Like they'll come 3 years later and be like, "Oh no, I have a bad disc." Fuck are you saying? Bad
Well,
disc from 10
let's
years
use
ago.
that as a way of a segue to talk about the changing understanding of pain, and particularly neuroscience and neuroplasticity, because you said something earlier that I wanted to highlight, where our this is the revelation of neuroplasticity and neuroscience, is that our beliefs and our perceptions directly influence our
Experience.
physical body and our experience of ourselves. And so if you have that belief, I have a slip disc, I have a bad back, I have, chronic back pain, while that's understandable that you might have that belief if you've had that situation for a long time, that's actually in some ways solidifying that pattern neurologically. And we know that neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you run that pattern, the more likely that is to persist.
And what's most difficult about that is that how can you trick yourself? And that was a question that I had for who did I have a Greg Lehman, Dr. Greg Lehman. I remember asking him, I'm like, I understand what you are saying right now, but how do I trick myself into not believing what my mind is believing?
Right.
I get it. I
Right.
get what you're saying, but I can't stop believing that my back's broken and I'm never going to be okay, like
Mhm.
subconsciously. Say, I think a big part of that has to do with having a better understanding of what pain actually means in our body, because it's like it's like saying it's like telling yourself to not think of a pink elephant. Like the first thing you're gonna do is think of a pink elephant, right? So it doesn't work that way. You can't really trick yourself to not think about something because it does the opposite effect. But you can prove yourself through finding things that you thought you weren't capable of doing. You can actually prove it to yourself by doing these things that you were catastrophizing and being afraid of, and developing a better understanding of what pain means and the limits that it doesn't impose on yourself, right? The best way that I can explain pain, and I think this is from also from one of Greg's books, that's free. It's a free resource. You guys can download it. It's being explained as a smoke alarm. So when you're cooking, you're in your kitchen, you're cooking some bacon, your alarm goes off. Is it a good indicator of the level of threat that you're under or amount of danger that you're under? Not really. You're just at home. It's 9 a.m. You're cooking breakfast. You're having a sip of coffee and orange juice, and the alarm went off. Like nothing about that should really alarm you. Like anybody in the rational head can be like, all right, it's the bacon that set off the alarm, right? So our brains are the same way. Our alarm, our pain sensor alarm, can also go off, can be highly sensitive for XYZ reason. Maybe it was a previous experience. It was a previous experience that was similar to that environment that you were once in, that's triggering your brain to think that you're in threat, or that you're having a threat. And so just understanding that the brain's sensitivity to external stimulus can influence your perception of threat around you, that alone should give you a bigger sense of security of what you can and can't do. So I think the second thing is that he mentions is using pain as a like a traffic light. So a certain level, you should never try to get rid of pain, because pain is a positive thing for survival. It always has
Yeah.
been. You don't want to eliminate pain. You just want to use it to your advantage so you can make informed decisions about your movement, your life, and your training essentially. So once you understand that, you start realizing that you don't have to be pain free to start doing the things that you enjoy or that you thought you couldn't do, right? Understanding that maybe a 3 out of 10 pain is acceptable for you to try to bend forward and touch your toes. Understanding that maybe a 5 out of 10 pain is acceptable for you to do a farmer's walk, an isometric contraction that doesn't, put any sort of structure at any sort of risk. It's just kind of understanding what that pain means and understanding what it allows you to do, and slowly keep progressing and exposing yourself to the movements that you were once afraid of.
Yeah. This is, I think, such an important perspective. And I talk about it a lot in patients that I treat with chronic illness, where sometimes there's the belief that they have to become completely symptom free in order to live a happy and rewarding life. And I really try to invite them to see that differently, because sometimes symptoms like pain are just a yellow light, to use the traffic signal, or they're just an artifact of that neural pattern that was created when the situation was more severe. And it doesn't mean that if you have a symptom that you have to never eat that food again, or you can't push yourself a little more with exercise or whatever you're doing to try to recover your health. And I think if you stay in that belief where any kind of symptom, discomfort, or pain is an immediate invitation to stop what you're doing and contract, then you're not going to make as much progress. So,
Absolutely. Talking about, you mentioned neuroplasticity. I have such a crazy example of that. I vividly remember at the peak of my back pain. I don't know. I went into the gym and I just said, okay, like my back's really bugging me today. I'm just gonna have a light deadlift session. I don't want to miss the session completely. I'm gonna work on something else, maybe like my timing or my coordination or my positions. Like I'm gonna work on something else that's not strength. And that day I came in, my back pain was so bad. And it literally felt like the distance that I had to move the bar from floor to lockout was twice as much. My perception of the amount of work that I needed to do was so exaggerated. And I spoke to Greg, I think, because I was doing like these like weekly sessions. And I spoke to him about it. I'm like, dude, it feels impossible to lift now. It was 2 plates and it was 120% of my max. It felt like it was the weight of the world was on that bar. And secondly, it felt like it traveled for 2 days straight. Like it
yeah.
was impossibly long distance. When he explained to me, I can't remember exactly the explanation. I'm not very well versed on like the science of neuroplasticity, why that happens, but that was his explanation for me.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite examples of neuroplasticity, and neuroplasticity, I've talked a lot about it on the show, but just for listeners who are new to it, it's a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, we can, it tells us that our beliefs and our experiences can literally change the structure and function of our brain, and that can be in a positive direction, right? But it can also be in a negative direction, which is what we've been talking about somewhat, where we have limiting beliefs, or we have, we had an intense traumatic experience, and that creates a kind of trauma loop in the brain that stays stuck even when we're safely out of whatever those circumstances were that caused that trauma. But one condition that I often use to kind of illustrate this to my patients is CRPS, or complex regional pain syndrome, which you're probably familiar with as a physical therapist. This is a really interesting condition in the sense that, so for those who aren't aware, it's a broad term that describes excess and prolonged pain that typically follows some kind of injury or inflammation. So the normal course of events would be You twist your ankle, you get a lot of swelling and inflammation, which is appropriate in that situation because it's needed to heal. And then your brain gets the signal that the threat has passed, the inflammation resolves, the pain resolves, and you go about your business. That's the normal thing that should happen. In CRPS, what happens is the injury occurs, the inflammation and pain and swelling happen, and for some reason which we don't fully understand, the brain continues to believe that the injury just happened and is still there, and so the inflammation and the pain don't go away. And I find that it's a fascinating example because objectively speaking, there is no more injury. That's past, that's healed, but the brain is sending signals to that area as if that injury had just occurred. And to me, that's a really good example of how separate the physical reality of the situation, the actual injury, and then the brain signal is. And if we understand that separation, like you said, it gives us a little more freedom to explore a different way of being with pain.
I love that explanation. I'm gonna use that.
Sure, yeah, you can take it.
Mhm.
So what's wrong with some of the most common treatments for back pain? You and I probably agree on a lot of this stuff. Like where you were in a graduate program, you had access, like you said, to the top professors who had studied this for their whole lives, but you were really disappointed in some of the conventional approaches and modalities.
Yes.
So say more about like what you learned in that process and what you think is lacking with a lot of the typical approaches.
Yeah, sure. The first one is, I guess, fear mongering of specific movements, demonizing specific movements, and heavily emphasizing others. For example, when I was at the peak of my back pain, I remember talking to my spine professor, and he was like, "Yeah, you shouldn't be deadlifting. Deadlifting is what's leading to your back pain. It's gonna eventually break your back." And he really believed that, man. He really did. So in
Deadlifting is what has saved my back, by the way. I will say that when I had back pain, deadlifting is actually what has improved and eliminated my back pain, for the record.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, fear mongering of movements. I don't think that does any good to anybody. Preventing people from moving in certain ways, like limiting their movement options and movement variability, that actually contributes to pain catastrophizing and contributes to pain in the future as well. Like I remember I went to see a therapist. Actually, I went to see Stuart McGill even for my back, and he pretty much prevented me from. Oh my God, this was crazy. Listen to this story. So on a Monday, I deadlift 504 pounds for 4 reps. Okay. And my
Wow.
back was naturally sore
Yeah.
after that. And then I was naturally very stiff, extremely stiff for the following. I had my appointment with two on a set, which by the way, I respect him a lot as an academic, but this was like something that I definitely didn't agree with. So go to see him on a Saturday, and he's doing all of these provocation tests, whatever. I actually end up just 2 hours later after the eval, just everything that he was saying about my pain was so bad, about my back was so bad that towards the end of the session, sorry, I'll go back to that. At the end of the session, when he is pretty much going over what I should and shouldn't do, a lot of his advice was centered around movement avoidance. Like even like on activities of daily living, it's like, okay, if you're gonna put your socks on, get on one knee, like do a lunge, and don't bend your back. Put your sock on, and then put your foot next to the other one and stand up. So it was all pretty much avoiding spinal flexion in any way, shape, or form. And even though I knew that wasn't the best course of action, just the fact that he said that made me stop bending completely, like through just in my daily life, like subconsciously. And that eventually led me to not be physically not be able to bend my spine,
Yeah.
which was insane. Like I completely lost my ability to bend my spine. I think that's one of them. And then I think the biggest one is that there's no bridge going from prehab or rehabilitation exercises into the exercises and movements that are actually required to live your life. It includes having a bent spine when you're picking your grandson off the floor, or like when you're bathing your dog, or when you're picking up groceries boxes from the ground and taking them up a flight of stairs. Like, there's no logical progression from a dead bug and a bird dog and a side plank into functional activities, or heavy lifting activities, or even sport performance activities. Like, there's no logical bridge there. I think those are like the two main
Yeah.
things where that therapists get wrong. And I think part of it has to do with a little bit of a hidden agenda. And this is something that I picked up in grad school as well, is that while you're a healer and a clinician, you're also a salesperson. And that was one thing that made me really sad about school and turned me off from the profession, was that I felt like a big part of the advice that we were giving people was centered around disempowering them, making them feel and think that we have the magic touch, that without them performing these exercises in front of us, without us starting the session with joint mobilization techniques and cupping and ART and whatever else, that they couldn't progress. Right, where I think that the plan of care should always be centered around empowering the patient, or the person, the human that's in front of us, empowering them to be able to make progress on their own. And there needs to be, again, that logical progression between the easy bands, isometric exercises, to whatever is functional for their life, their lifestyle.
I love that. Love that, and love the book and your approach, and think it's so needed in this industry where there's, frankly, kind of a lot of stuff that's out of date at this point, where the typical recommendations are not in alignment with what the latest scientific research is telling us about pain. And that's something I really appreciate about your approach and your book. So, can you tell people where to learn more about your work and pick up a copy of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. You guys can pick up a copy at hybridperformancemethod.com under the tab Back in Motion.
Great. And then are you on social media? Like, where can people follow you and
And
learn more about what's going on in your world, your boxing career, and what's next for you?
yep, I'm on all of the social medias at Steffi Cohen. That's where you can find just my day-to-day stuff, and also the educational content that I post on YouTube is longer format, still at Steffi Cohen. And I'm fighting on July 8th, so you guys don't want to miss that.
Nice. Good luck with that. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Likewise, thank you so much.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Keep sending your questions to chriskresser.com/podcast question. We'll see you next time. That's the end of this episode of Revolution Health Radio. If you appreciate the show and want to help me create a healthier and happier world, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. They really do make a difference. If you'd like to ask a question for me to answer on a future episode, you can do that at chriskresser.com/podcast question. You can also leave a suggestion for someone you'd like me to interview there. If you're on social media, you can follow me at twitter.com/Chris Kresser or facebook.com/Chris Kresser L.A.C. I post a lot of articles and research that I do throughout the week there that never makes it to the blog or podcast, so it's a great way to stay abreast of the latest developments. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you next time.